World Literature, Lesson 31, Les Miserables, where we'll start on part 2. Now, do you recall the name Montfermeil? This is the town or the little village with the inn where we have the Thénardiers. We already know that they're scamps, that they are continuously trying to steal more and more money from Fantine, lying to her, using their little girl Cassette as a servant and abusing her and treating her poorly. Okay, we already know all that, right? And Cassette is called the Lark. She's a little girl of about 5, 6 years old, maybe a teeny bit more than that. I'm having a hard time remembering. Don't worry about that. But she is the servant. She sleeps or is under the table, eats with the animals. Really very, very harsh life. Okay. Mistreated. It says at one point, it says, some people have only so much love in their heart. And if you spend it all on, in this case, the 2 daughters, then you have no more left for anyone else. There's beatings or love or hugs, and it gets dispensed. We even know that their 3rd child, who is a boy, is totally neglected and unloved in this scenario. So before we do anything else, I want you to go to that section and I want you to look. Now, what's happened here, you looked at the part where Jean Valjean now has escaped prison again, and you know the events of that. They're surrounding the ship Orion, so if you don't remember, I didn't go over it for you. I don't need to tell you everything. You can go back and look and understand that, but make sure that you do, just like we said on the last tape. Now, again, you're wanting to write at least as much as I write. So here, when I change color to the blue, this becomes an assignment for you within the notes. So there's going to be 2 things here. This, of course, is after he's escaped from prison. He's coming to rescue Cassette and take her with him to fulfill his promise to Fantine. Though she is dead, he said he will take care of her. Okay, so there's 2 questions I want you to pursue. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I want you to find 3 best quotes of her harsh life, describing the harshness of her life with the Thénardiers, and 3 best examples of Jean Valjean's kindness toward her during this section where he comes to rescue her. Now, let me say 2 things about this. One is you want to write out the whole quote. I'm not expecting you to write just a few words here. Write out the quote with the page number. Don't just pick short quotes. It's not about just getting this job done. It's about finding the best parts this novel has to offer that you can build on later when you're writing your paper. Okay. The next quotes you want to find are the best examples of Jean Valjean's kindness as he comes in during this scene, as he comes and takes her away. And again, I'm writing it like this to remind you that it's your job to fill this in on your notes. All right, now, there are going to be 2 rather quick changes of character. Okay, so we're going to have Jean Valjean escaped from prison. He's left the name Monsieur or Mayor Madeleine behind. He does have money. Remember that he's hidden away, and it's actually near this town, Montfermeil. So he's able to equip himself with enough resources to be able to cause her to escape and get a cheap home. He's also getting a very hidden away, isolated house in the middle of Paris. So that why he's hiding, right? they think he's dead, so they're not actively looking for him, but if they see him again, they're going to pick him up one more time as the escaped convict. And then who would take care of this little girl? Again, the same dilemma kind of haunts him. Again, with as less intensity, but it always hangs in the background. So we have his first change. He lives in the old Gorbeau house, and he's become known as Master Gorbeau. I'm sorry. And I'm going to look for a quote. Whoops, I should be doing this in the other color, sorry, to be consistent. So pretend these are my part of the notes, okay, not your part to have to add extra things. And then I'm going to come back to a quote there in just a minute. Well, let's go ahead and look at it. So open up your book. Now this is entering into the third great phase of Jean Valjean's life. Okay, we've had him as the convict who's finally served his term, and he has this experience with the bishop and Petit Gervais, which brings him to a true place of repentance. He then has this new life as a mayor, where he's become a wealthy, successful man, and he's changed the entire town for good. And he's still been operating under that with Fantine before he goes back to prison. Now this is his third great phase, where he becomes Master Gorbeau. And it's a beautiful passage here, and I want you to think about it as we read it. It begins on the bottom of 267. It says, Jean Valjean, well, even let me start the sentence above. Something new was entering his soul. Jean Valjean had never loved anything. For 25 years, he had been alone in the world. He had never been a father, lover, husband, or friend. At the galleys, he was cross, sullen, abstinent, ignorant, and intractable. The old convict had a virginal heart. In other words, it had never been awakened to love of any kind. Okay. His sister and her children had left in his memory only a vague and distant impression, which had finally almost entirely vanished. He had made every exertion to find them again, and not succeeding, he had forgotten them. Human nature is thus constituted. The other tender emotions of his youth, if any such he had, were lost in an abyss. In other words, no longer any memory or any feelings, not even any emotional memories regarding them. Now here we go. When he saw Cosette, when he had taken her, carried her away and rescued her, he felt his heart moved. All that he had of feeling and affection was aroused and vehemently attracted toward this child. He would approach the bed where she slept and would tremble there with delight. He felt inward stirrings like a mother, and knew not what they were. For it is something very incomprehensible and very sweet, this grand and strange emotion of a heart in its first love. Poor old heart, so young. Beautiful phrase there. Poor old heart. What are we saying? Even though he's an old man, he's never experienced love, the emotion of love to any depth. Poor old heart, so young. It goes on and it says, but as he was 55 and Cosette was but 8 years old, all that he might have felt of love in his entire life melted into a sort of ineffable radiance. This was the second white vision he had seen. The bishop had caused the dawn of virtue on his horizon. Cosette evoked the dawn of love. And again, we see one more time, like we see so often in this book, this dual holding. I think I want to go back to that first and second commandment again. This dual cognizance of the spiritual, God, his own presence, his own influence in our lives, and the influence of others. And he has this in a two-pronged way, the influence of others for good and the influence of others for bad in our lives. And of course this here, as well as the bishop, cassette as well as the bishop, the influence for good in a person's heart. Okay, and he's got more quotes of the same variety. That's a great section in there. Well, we know what happens. They go on fine for a while, and they only go out in the evening and all this stuff, and he's able to spend some of the money that he owns, so they're never in poverty, but they don't live as though they're wealthy, but he's always given money to the poor. Javert notices, who is now in Paris, notices him again and is on his trail. And so then we have the hunt through Paris and through the nights, and then we are going to have a new identity. And this next identity is where he drops down into the convent over the wall to rescue, because he's actually really caught. They've got him squeezed in back into a corner. The police are coming, and he scales the wall with her with a rope. And you can go and review that section, make sure you understand how this happens. And he drops into the convent and establishes himself there. And I don't want to go into that detail, but I do want you to understand. So maybe I better put this in another color here. I want you to understand, how does he get from being the master gobo to being living in the convent? How does that work out? So you should be able to follow that yourself. Even when I'm not asking you to write other sentences or an actual assignment here, when it's in blue, it means it's not a part that I'm covering. I'm going to leave the detail of understanding that part of the story to you. But he becomes a new man now, and now his new name is Ultimus. By the way, who's he meet there at the convent? Old Fauchelevent. Remember who he is. And that's the man he rescues from under the cart. So he pretends to be his brother with his little girl and comes, and don't forget they get buried in the cemetery. Know that part of the story yourself. But now he becomes Ultimus Fauchelevent, and this becomes a new section of his life. Okay, so you want to know these major sections as he switches identity to identity to identity to identity. We've covered 4 of them now. All right, so go ahead and make sure you've studied or review those sections that I've talked to you about, and we'll talk to you next week. God bless.